In this short presentation, I'd just like to cover an introduction to instructional design. And what instructional design is essentially a systematic approach to creating instructional materials or learning objects. So the goal and objective of this short presentation is just that you as learners will become familiar with the instructional design process and recognize a few characteristics of effective instructional design. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to create some short instructional lessons, be it through PowerPoint, screen capture, video, that incorporate these effective strategies. So, instructional design itself is a process of creating intentional learning. So we go into teaching or instruction with the goal of having the learners obtain certain bits of knowledge. And we have a premeditated idea of what the learner should learn. So what we're going to do with instructional design is help to influence through certain conditions an environment for learning those desired outcomes. And another important part of instructional design is it helps us align our instruction with our assessments. And both of those, in the end, your instruction, which is your content, your assessment, which is the testing or review, should be aligned with those original outcomes that you plan. And instructional design itself is not an iterative process, or is not a linear process. What that means is it's not, even though we can create some steps to create effective learning, we need to go back through those steps and assure that those are being effective. So after we use our instructional design with learners, we need to go back and assess whether or not that met the goals that we needed, and then go back and reiterate our process and to better enhance the learning. So what's the first step of instructional design? The first step is figuring out who we're teaching. Our target audience is what that's called. So it's the who of our learning. So are we teaching kindergartners, or are we teaching people in the workplace? Are we teaching people that have experience with this subject, or are we teaching complete novices? That's going to have an effect on how we teach and the content of our learning. So, for example, an expert learner. So if I was going into a computer science class, going to teach some, basic computer skills. So I'm teaching Excel to a computer science class. They're experienced in computer science, so they're going to differ from a novice learner. So they might have a more in-depth knowledge and well-organized thought structure. They may tend to notice more meaningful features. They have variable levels of flexibility with how they learn too, because they already know a lot of the underlying structure, so there's a lot of flexibility in how you go about teaching them. Another thing to think about with adult learners, I know a lot of people in here are the human resource minor, so you're going to be working with adult learners, and you have to remember they bring a wealth of experience with them. So they've been through school, they've had various other say trainings in the past, and they bring a lot of that with them, so you can really leverage that. So you can really go back to a lot of that previous learning to help enhance the instruction that you're creating. And that's a lot different than if you're a K through 12 teacher working with students that don't have that past experience to really go back and lean on. A lot of them are new to material, so you have to take a different approach to them as you would an adult learner who has had a lot of experiences in life through learning, training, and even hands-on experience. So that's why it's really important to keep your target audience in mind, and you really need to decide that target audience. So for the projects we'll do in the future, I'll ask you, who is your target audience? So if you're creating an instructional video on cooking, is your target audience, the college student with no experience cooking, or is this for an advanced cooking class? Those two videos would be completely different, as you can imagine. So target audience is very important. So let's break up instruction itself. So what are the typical components of a instructional design? So if I'm creating it, whether it's a class, a single session of a class, a whole semester, these things will apply. The first being the goals. And the goals are the broad, overarching umbrella of what we're going to learn in the course. So in our case, for this course, the overarching goal is for students with a minor in either educational media or human resources to gain some experience in instructional technology and design. So very broad, it's going to cover a lot of things. Now our objectives underneath that are going to be a lot more specific and hopefully measurable. So that might be learning Photoshop to create instructional handouts, learning iMovie to create instructional videos. So they're a lot more specific. We know what you're going to do, who's going to do it, how they're going to do it. So those are your objectives. And those objectives can be measured. In our case, in this class, they're measured by your output of the product, your projects you're going to be doing. In some cases, it may be a quiz or a test. But the whole idea is that the content between there, the content that builds upon any prior knowledge or any past experience or any content at all that you create that falls between those objectives and assessments should align with that. So if I create an objective of using Photoshop to create an instructional handout, then I'm going to have you do Photoshop tutorials because that's what you're going to use for your final project. I'm not going to give you an assignment using Photoshop, obviously, and give you Dreamweaver tutorials. That doesn't make sense, but you've seen that happen before where the objective of your final project or the test does not align with the content, and that's really detrimental to the learner. So that's what you want to make sure you do, is make sure you align everything you're teaching should align to that final assessment of the student. So what are some ways that we can ensure that not only we do align our content with the assessment, but also that the learner has a enriching experience with our instruction? The first thing we can do is look at a systematic approach. And in this case, we're looking at Gagne's 9 events of instruction. So this is a systematic approach that was designed by Robert Gagne, and it's based on experimentation, research, and practice. So this framework for creating your instruction is a tried and true method, and that's what this really is, the framework. So once you know what you're doing and what you want to teach, you can use this framework to really lay out your instruction. So some of the steps may be to gain the user's attention. That could be present a problem that you're going to address with this learning, relate a video to the learning just to grab their attention. So this is really grabbing the student's attention and getting them motivation to really dig into the rest of this learning. So however you can do that, whether it's a story, a video, a problem that's presented, it can be a multitude of things, but you really want to pull the learner into the instructional material beyond this point. The next step is to inform the learners of the objectives. So let them know at the end of this lesson or the end of this course, what will you know in the end? What do I expect you to take from this class? What can you expect to take from the class? Step 3, which really works well for adult learners, is stimulate recall of prior learning. Relate it back to something else that they've learned in the past. So if I'm going to do a demo of Dreamweaver, I may try to stimulate your recall of learning Microsoft Word, because most students in college have used Microsoft Word, and I can relate some of the tools in Microsoft Word into some of the tools that we might use in Dreamweaver. So just try to relate to a broader knowledge that your target audience has. Step 4 is really the grunt work. Present the content. In our case, the instructional handout, that's your content. We'll do videos for content. We'll do presentations. So it's just a step-by-step, actually the instructional portion of the design. And as you can see, a lot of people think that is the only part they need to worry about, is what is the content. But the content, you can see, is just one small piece in this larger structure that helps ensure that the learner gets as much as they can out of the instruction. So after you present the content, guide the learners. Guide them through give them examples. In your math class, it was always nice to get those examples on the board. Once you are presented with the how-to, then show some examples of how it works, where it fits in, and the process involved. Then after you do that, you're going to call for performance, which is essentially practice. Create a project, do a worksheet, just some way to let them practice the content they've learned. Give feedback to let them know, what they need to focus on more. Maybe there's a portion that needs addressed further. Once you give that feedback, then you can finally do the assessment of performance, which would be, in our case, in this class, we do projects. We do 5 different projects, and that's the assessment of your performance. In a lot of classes you take, that's your, chapter tests or, midterm exams. Those are those assessments. And again, those should align back to those original objectives in the course. And then the final step is to provide some practice. Review other scenarios that they can use this instruction in. So after you finish your instructional handout with Photoshop, you can look into things like how to use Photoshop in web design, how to use Photoshop in video, and how to use Photoshop further on in this course. And that's a good way to review and practice, is that will bring Photoshop back into other projects. So when you're doing your video for your final project, I may show you ways to create titles using Photoshop, how to create credits using Photoshop, how to do special image compression for your website. So it's just, that's how you bring back prior learning again, and that's that 9th step. The 9th step could stretch, the rest of the year, the rest of the semester. That 9th step is really just practicing, and reviewing. So this framework here, and there's a lot of frameworks out there. You look up instructional design, and you'll find frameworks, you'll find systems. There are a lot of them out there that have been studied and proven to work. And in our case, this one's broken down to a lot more steps, which gives you more of a checklist to work from. So think of this as your checklist for instructional design for your projects coming in the future. And it's Gagne's 9 events. I suggest you look up Robert Gagne, read a little bit more about the research he did and how he came about coming to the conclusion of these 9 events of instruction. Okay? And you'll notice setting goals is one of our original parts of instructional design. And again, those are broad statements. And this is just an example. Learners will gain an appreciation for instructional technologies used in the workplace. This is our goal for our course, the whole semester, is that you guys will gain an appreciation for using technology to create instruction. There's no specifics stated there. You just get a broad idea of what the course will entail. And from that point, you're going to break it down even further with objectives. So in our course, we have 5 projects, and those are really the assessments for our objectives in the course. So objectives in our course are to, create print materials, video materials, presentation materials using instructional technology to create final output for learners. But for your smaller things, you're going to have specific objectives, even more narrowed down than that. And this slide just gives you one approach to creating your objectives. They're much more specific than the goals, so they're going to include things like, what is my audience? What behavior are they going to be learning? What conditions will it be under? And to what degree do I expect them to learn this? So if you read this example, it's the ABCD method here: audience, behavior, condition, and degree. And you can see in this example, those are all highlighted. At the end of this lesson, EDUC 370 students, which is our audience, will be able to write meaningful learning objectives, which is our behavior, given an assigned topic and target audience, which is our condition, and without requiring assistance from the instructor. Okay? So that's your audience, behavior, condition, and degree. And if you have those 4 things in there, then that's going to be detailed enough to let the learner know exactly what they are going to get out of this learning. Okay? So it's not that broad overarching, goal that we looked at, it's very specific, so they can really just look at, if you had 5 objectives, they know the 5 things they're going to walk away with from this course. So using this audience, behavior, condition, and degree, you're going to get the best description possible of that learning objective and give the learner the most meaningful idea of what they're going to be walking away with. Bloom's taxonomy, and taxonomy is just kind of a vocabulary, are action verbs that kind of describe what the learner will be able to do. And this allows you to very specifically aim those objectives to whether or not, if you look from bottom to top, the bottom is the most rudimentary level of knowledge, and as you go to the top, it's the highest level of knowledge. So what are they going to be able to do? Are they going to be able to just remember, say a set of vocabulary words? The next step up, will they be able to understand, describe, and explain, what they learned in the, say, learning module? The next step up is, can they actually apply that to a real-world scenario or a workplace scenario? The next step up, can they then analyze? So a higher level of knowledge would be able to analyze what they've done, where their mistakes are, what they could do better, or what they did right. The next step up will be able to evaluate others and how well they use the knowledge that they gain. And finally, create. Can they actually use this to go out and actually do what you want them to do? In our case with Photoshop, whether you can remember from the bottom where the tools are, whether you can describe what that tool does, whether you could apply that tool to a scenario someone gave you, whether you could analyze, say, an image and tell what tools were used. Could you evaluate an image and tell them what maybe tools would have worked better, what approaches? And finally, can you actually go and from scratch create something in Photoshop? So those would be our level of learning in Photoshop. And just about anything that you instruct on can fall into one of these categories. And this is a great way to find that word you're looking for, when in your objective, what do you want them to do? Do you want them to just understand? You want them to be able to analyze? Do you want them to be able to create? Okay, so these are the levels of knowledge that you have access to, and that will dictate how your instruction is designed, depending on the level of knowledge you want at the end. So finally, assessing learning. This is an important one because, and I think the main thing I want you to take from this is that you ensure that whatever you assess in the end is not only aligned with those original objectives that you created, but also aligned with that content in the middle. Because we've all taken courses where, an instructor might have some good objectives of what you're going to learn throughout the course. Then you stray during the content far away from those objectives. So, you get into other topics, it just kind of pulls the instructor away from those original objectives. But that final assessment comes back and actually assesses you on those objectives, and your content did not align with those objectives whatsoever. So the important thing is, and you'll see it underlined here, is the objectives and the assessments must align. So don't teach what you're not going to assess on, and ensure that those objectives, the content, and the assessment all align, and the student gets the most out of that learning. Also, here's some things to avoid. It's just vague assessments, and sometimes you'll have to do that. In the case of this course, some of our things are very creative, so I might not be able to give an exact scale on a few things, but wherever you can, you want to be very specific. So a very specific criteria for an objective would be to say they can create a Google account, but not in, you don't want to say in 2 minutes or less, because there's a lot that can fall into that. Internet connection can be slow. So you may want to say create a Google account without input from the instructor. Okay, don't time them. You also don't want to use very vague things like with much proficiency. So don't state that a learner will be able to create a new Google account with much proficiency. So because who states what proficiency is? A Again, a better way to state that would be the learner will be able to create a new Google account without input from the instructor, or we'll be able to create a new Google account given a fresh install of Windows or given Firefox and an internet connection. So try to be specific, but not so specific as you're actually giving how quickly someone could do the task. Okay? Those are just a couple things to avoid. You can think of multitudes more that may cause confusion to the learner. But again, the last thing you want to take from this slide is that you align everything. Align your objectives, your content, and your actual final assessment. So that's instructional design in a nutshell. Again, we won't get too deep into it. This is instructional design can be a whole career, a whole degree. But what we want to do is just ensure that you use some of these common frameworks and almost that checklist to help you create the best possible instructional design that you can without having to be an instructional designer. So as you learn these new technologies and tools in this class, by looking back and using this basic instructional design approach, you'll ensure that not only you're learning the technology and you're applying the technology, but you're applying it in a way that is instructionally sound and will be of the most benefit from any learner that you have.